Meeting this evening of the Norfolk City Council. On the wall just south of the doorway there is the Open Minutes Meeting Act, posted for your reading if you want that way. And at this time then I'd like to have a moment of silence and followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Then would you please call roll?
Granquist?
Here.
Lange?
Here.
Merrill?
Here.
Clausen?
Here.
Murin? Moaning?
Here.
Faust? Here. File?
Here. Okay. Next item on the agenda then is the approval of the consent agenda.
I'll make the motion, Your Honor.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent agenda. Would you please vote?
All council members present voting in the affirmative.
Then we have the regular agenda. So moved.
Second.
Please vote.
All council members present voting in the affirmative. Motion carries.
Okay, that brings us into the area of public hearings. And this evening, we have a few public hearings before us, but I would like to, at this time, we have public hearing item number 24, which is consideration of feasibility of amendment to the comprehensive plan to a change from single-family residential to commercial at property located at 213 North 7th Street. And along with that, I would like also to open the public hearing at the request of the Mercer Development LLC to consider a zone change from I-1 to C-1 on the same property located at 213 North 7th Street. That then, at this time, I'd like to open both public hearings and ask first if who from staff is going to speak to it.
I believe I will, and okay. I do not see the applicant here tonight, so I might just have to explain it to you all too. These public hearings are for the property at the corner of 7th Street and Nebraska. And currently it is zoned I-1 with a comprehensive plan of single family. So that's kind of a different thing there. But they would request the C1 zoning and amendment to the comp plan because Dave Amick would like to put a building up there across the street from the news channel, and for the news channel to use that building to store their news vans and semis, and then also to have a small office in the front there for them to use.
Okay. Any questions for Val during the public hearing portion? Not then, again, this is a public hearing. I ask if there is anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak in favor of either of these two changes. Then, seeing none, I ask if there is anyone who wishes to speak in opposition or who merely has questions regarding either of these two changes. Do we have a report from the Planning Commission?
Yes. The Norfolk Planning Commission held public hearings on March 8th, 2016 to consider amending the comp plan and the zoning change at 213 North 7th, and the Planning Commission recommended approval of the request on 9-0 votes.
Mr. President, I'll be abstaining from voting on these ordinances. I'm an employee of that organization.
Okay, so noted. Do we have one on the other one also? Do we have that?
I said that I combined them.
Okay. Okay, Seeing that there is no other input from the audience during the public hearing, I would like to close both public hearings at this time and ask if I could have consideration of ordinance 5384, amending the comprehensive plan for single-family residential to commercial on property located at 213 North 7th Street.
I move consideration of ordinance number 5384.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion? Do we have a short title?
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Madison County, Nebraska, amending the future land use map of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska, providing when this ordinance shall be in full force and effect, and providing for publication of this ordinance in pamphlet form.
If not, would you please vote then?
All council members present voting in the affirmative. Councilmember Merrill abstaining. Ordinance 5384 carries on first reading.
Your Honor, I move we suspend the rules and pass ordinance 5384 on second and third.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we suspend the rules and pass this ordinance on second and third. Is there any discussion? Not, would you please vote?
All council members present voting in the affirmative. Councilmember Merrill abstaining. Ordinance 5384 carries on second and third.
The next item on the agenda then is consideration of ordinance number 5385, approving the zoning change from I-1 light industrial to C1 local business district on property located at 213 North 7th Street as requested by the Mercer Development.
I'll make a motion for consideration of ordinance number 5385.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve. Is there any discussion?
I'll be abstaining.
Okay, so noted. Not, would you please vote? Or, yeah, that's right, yeah.
All council members present voting in the affirmative. Councilmember Merrill abstaining. Ordinance 5385 carries on first reading.
Your Honor, I move we suspend the rules and pass ordinance 5385 on second and third.
Second.
Discussion? Not, would you please vote?
All council members present voting in the affirmative. Councilmember Merrill abstaining. Ordinance 5385 carries on second and third.
That brings us into item 28 on the agenda, which is a public hearing at the request of Terry Hymas, Sandra Hymas, Jeff Hymas, and Jennifer Hymas to consider a zoning change from R1 to C3 on property located at 1305 North 9th Street and 902 West Benjamin Avenue. Excuse me. This time I'd like to open that public hearing and ask staff if they have excuse me, anything.
This location is surrounded by C3 and C1 on the north side of Benjamin Avenue. And so this little piece of property is just kind of a finger that used to be R1 with houses there, and the houses are now gone. And so the request is for the C3 district, which is the same as on the west side of it. And the reason that they went with C3 instead of C1 is because they're thinking about putting a scooters there, which would require a drive-through. And a drive-through is permitted in C3, and it would be a conditional use in C1. That's just kind of an explanation of why they chose that.
Questions? Okay, this is a public hearing. At this time, then, I'd ask if there's anyone in the audience who wishes to speak in favor of this proposed zoning change. Seeing none, I would then ask if there's anyone who wants to speak in either in opposition or who has questions regarding the proposed zoning change. Do we have a planning commission report?
Two. The Norfolk Planning Commission held a public hearing on Tuesday, March 8th, 2016, at the request of Terry, Sandra, Jeff, and Jennifer Hymas to consider a zone change from R1 Single Family Residential to C3 Service Commercial on property located at 1305 North 9th and 902 West Benjamin. The Planning Commission recommended approval on a 9-0 vote.
Again, is there any discussion? If not, then at this time I would like to close the public hearing, and then we'd go down to consideration of ordinance 5386, approving for the zoning change request from R1 to C3 at property located at 1305 North 9th Street and 902 West Benjamin Avenue.
I'll make the motion in consideration of ordinance number 5386.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion? If not, would you please, short title?
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Madison County, Nebraska, amending the zoning district map of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska, providing when this ordinance shall be in full force and effect, and providing for publication of this ordinance in pamphlet form.
Would you please vote?
All council members present voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5386 carries on first reading.
Your Honor, I move we suspend the rules and pass ordinance 5386 on second and third.
Second. Is there any discussion? If not, would you please vote?
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5386 carries on second and third.
Okay, that then brings us to item number 30 on the regular agenda. This is consideration of approval of ordinance number 5376, amending section 24-164 of the official city code to allow parking on the east side of 7th Street between Michigan Avenue and Paswalk Avenue. This ordinance was tabled at the January 19, 2016 City Council meeting, and at this time I would look for a motion to remove this ordinance from the table.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Okay, would you please vote?
Excuse me, all council members present voting in the affirmative.
Okay, we're off the table and we're open for discussion.
Your Honor, we do have some, Beth, if you can bring the screens down, we do have some pictures to show if you'd like. Last time during the tabling action in January, the council directed staff to do some background as far as the alleyway, whether there was an alleyway there or whether there was not, and just kind of give an overview of the what that would look like. So we've done that. We're having a problem. Maybe we've done that.
You can get it up on one screen, it looks like. This one won't come down.
Can you fire up the other one? Or, well, can we show?
It's coming.
Okay.
It has to heat up. I didn't know
One's fine.
Engineering staff put together the information that the council was looking for as far as the alleyway on 7th Street. The first picture we'll show you, if we can get it to bring up. It should be on your monitors as well, but for the audience, we're going to be looking at a Google map of South 7th Street, which will show the area in question. The area in question is the terraced area in between the railroad tracks and 7th Street from Paswalk South to Michigan. That area over the years has collected more and more cars and trailers and trucks and vehicles of that nature over the years. We've had a request by the railroad to remove those cars from their property. As I told the council last time we met, that I asked them politely to just wait and we'll see if we could find a solution for that. And the solution that's in front of you tonight, the potential solution in front of you tonight, is allow parking on the east side. We ran this proposal through the subcommittee, Public Works and Public Safety, on 2 different occasions and talked in length about the Public Works and Public Safety aspects of the decision-making process before you tonight. The question was asked of whether there was an alleyway in between 7th Street and 8th Street. There is not an alleyway there. There never was a platted alley that we can find. There's a small stub alley right off of Paswalk that goes south a bit and then on Derland, is that right? A little bit south, Mark? Yeah, bring that up. We'll show you the...
Shane, could I interrupt you for a little bit?
Can you hear? Yeah.
That was a question for the audience. Is everyone in the audience able to hear the remarks that way that are being made?
Couldn't hear a word he said.
Can you hear me now? Is it better?
Okay.
Okay, I'll speak closer. I apologize for that. The question was asked if there was an existing alleyway in between 7th and 8th Street. We did do the background on that, as Mark's indicated on the map. There is no alleyway between 7th and 8th Street. There's some stub areas that would appear to be an alley, but it does not transist all the way through from Paswalk to Michigan. If you look at that, you'll see the lots that were platted way back when were significantly large lots, and they went from property line to property line. So it would be very difficult to put an alleyway through there, to say the least. You'd have to have all the owners of those properties in agreement with that to do that. And there's a lot of obstructions, buildings and otherwise, in the way. And then you'd have to acquire the land and then plat it, then put the alleyway in there. We can show you some actual pictures that were taken here this spring, or actually wintertime, as you can see. The one on the left is from Michigan looking north. You can see that it's the alleyway in there is, or the area in there is property line to property line. There is a large utility easement that goes through there, but there's buildings in the way all the way to the north. The picture on the right, I believe, is from Derland looking south. Is that right, Mark? That's that stub alleyway that went about a lot or two in depth from the north. And then if you went all the way to Paswalk, we don't have that picture. There is a similar sized stub area from Paswalk south. So the potentials to put an alleyway in there are very, very limited in your staff's opinion. We could discuss that further if you'd like. At the end of the day, the decision making for the council tonight is whether you want to allow parking on the east side of 7th Street. 7th Street is 31 feet wide. It's the same as Madison Avenue, same as Prospect Avenue in width, and we allow parking on one side of both of those streets. The carrying capacity of that, or the counts that we have for Prospect and 7th Street are almost identical, just over 2,000 cars a day for those two areas. So it's a relatively small number in comparison to the major arterial streets that you'd have in your town. So that is the background information that the council wanted the staff to gather for them. Be happy to answer any questions that you might have further on that. I will also, we looked at the code closely, and the terraced parking, that's our part of the property. We don't allow parking on terraced properties throughout town either. We do have an ordinance against that as well. Be happy to answer any questions that you might have on this particular issue.
Is there any questions for staff, or otherwise it's open for discussion right now?
So Shane, just to reiterate that last point, this parking has never technically been legal, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
It just became kind of an attractive area because probably the width of the green space in there, that's turned into kind of a catch-all for the neighborhood for sure, and maybe even others that just park there willy-nilly.
It is kind of a catch-all, but it is allowing traffic to flow through there freely. You know, you talk about putting car on that street, you're narrowing down your pathways to a little over 10 foot. You know, I know we have that on Madison and Prospect, but I guess I'm not so sure we want to do it to another street when I still feel like there's options out there that we could be addressing and looking at that we haven't looked at yet. I know that every time we brought up gravel or, you know, some sort of hard surface, that's been kind of shot down, and so really the only option would be some sort of paving, you know, and I know Mark threw some numbers together to look at that. I think the numbers were north of 100,000 to around 120,000. I think it'd be worth our time to maybe sit down with some of the people in the neighborhood. I believe there's probably 22 houses impacted by this. Am I right? 21, 22?
Yeah, that's pretty close.
You know, so there's pretty high density there. You know, if you take 120,000, you put it on a, you know, maybe we could talk some bonding. You know, I think it opens up some more discussion on how bonds work when you're on a street that's can be an emergency route, or a, you know, a street that's got over, it's got quite, to me, 2,000 people driving up and down that street is quite a bit in a day's time.
Are you suggesting, Councilman, that we could assess the property owners on 7th Street?
I think there should be some discussion about that with the property owners. I don't think that discussion.
No, we have not suggested, staff hasn't
I
suggested.
mean, I just
that we
threw
do
some numbers out there. You know, if we can go 15-year on a bond, correct, Randy?
I believe that's correct.
Yeah. You know, I know I was talking about, because it was in my opinion, a road that's a high-traffic road, there should be some costs from the city involved in this. I don't know if everybody feels an agreement of that or not, but also the mayor pointed out to me that, you know, you do it for one, you're gonna do it for another, and so the residents probably need to have some cost involved also. But you take 120,000, put it on a 15-year bond, and what are we looking, Randy, maybe 6%?
Probably less than that.
Okay.
Probably less than that in today's interest rate environment. I mean, you're probably looking at closer to 4% or 5%, well, probably 5% if you went 15 years.
You know, if that's 100% bonded towards those 22 houses, that's roughly $46 a month. You know, if you take it in the city, we divide some cost on this because it is a high traffic area. A lot of citizens use that road. It's not really a destination road, in my opinion. It's more of a through road, you know, like a Paswalk, or like a 7th and, you know, you could 7th and Paswalk, you know, it's not a Paswalk, it's not a First Street, but it definitely gets you from Paswalk to Omaha Avenue. And, you know, if you do some number juggling, you say it's a $60,000 bond. Just for instance, I'm just throwing it out there, not saying that's how you do it. Just for discussion reasons, you throw it out there. That becomes a $23 month cost to the residents, or an annual payment of $270, and an overall payment of a little over $2,000, or just under $3,000 per lot. So there is, I think, some justification into looking down that road. Not saying that the residents of that area are going to be in favor of it. I just think the discussion should be made, because in my opinion, you put traffic on that road, instead of a step forward, I kind of feel like it's a step back. So, and it's just something I want to throw out there and put in the discussion.
Shane, is your figures on the cement, or is that a cheaper or a more inexpensive way to do that, or what kind of surface were you talking, cement?
Mark had kind of talked about these numbers.
Yeah, I believe that estimate was based off of doing some concrete paving. I believe it involved removing a 2-foot curb and gutter section and adding 10 foot of concrete, which would essentially add 8 foot more to the width of the street, is what that estimate was based off. 6-inch concrete, which is our typical minimum street surfacing, and the minimum you'd probably want to use for any kind of parking.
Other thoughts? I guess, and I hear what you're saying, Shane, but I would only feel comfortable with us doing this if we had, and I guess I would go a little bit to the legal side to see, one, you know, if we have 22 residences along that place, if I have 2 or 3 of them that say, no, we do not want to participate in this, because I think it needs to be 100% share of because that traffic's been on that street. So people purchase properties on that street with that traffic there. So I think the Councilman Moning's remark earlier that, they were parking there illegally for, 20 or 30 or whatever number of years it was. He didn't put any years to it, but what the parking that was occurring there was not legal parking. So I guess if I would be inclined to support it only on the condition that, the costs are borne by the people that benefit from it. So, and I guess Clint, is there any provisions that would, is there a break point where okay, you got to have 50% of the people saying, and then we're going to be assessing it also to the remainder of the groups, or 60%, or?
There are several things.
Great.
One is that, first of all, I think the first question is whether you could assess anything there relates to whether the street is already built to city requirements, or you're rebuilding it. I mean, normally you haven't reassessed costs once a street's built, unless you, if you come back through and redo it. The statute allows for you to, even though you've paid for the street in front of your house once, you could have a district to pay for it. Again, the other thing, I'm not sure what's contemplated here. To answer your question, Councilman Lange, if it's deemed that there can be a paving district, there's a remonstrance provision that I believe is 50% of the front footage, and if you get more than that that's opposed to it, then you can't improve you can't make those improvements. If it's a gap paving, there is no remonstrance, and I don't know if this would meet the requirement of a gap paving lengthwise or not.
I would assume that it would not, being that the street is already improved, but that would be something we would have to look into a lot more to see if this is one of those types of paving districts.
Yeah, so I mean, when you begin to talk about the district, it creates several questions that I don't exactly have the precise answer for.
Yeah, I guess to me it seems like it gets all a little complicated here. I appreciate Congressman Clausen's concerns about traffic flow, but I guess I would point out again that we're in the same situation on Madison and Prospect, same width of the street, parking allowed on one side of the street there, similar traffic counts on all three of those streets. And the discussion about paving to accommodate something that technically really should never have been. To me, we have a limited amount of resources for our street needs, and I would prefer to see those dedicated toward maintenance and expansion where we need it.
Just to go off your last comment, though, wouldn't you call this expansion where you need it?
Again, I'd go back to we're in the same circumstance on Madison and Prospect with the same traffic counts and the same width and parking already allowed on one side of the street.
I think you're right with the circumstance. The only thing I disagree about that is this is a unique situation where you have a 50-foot setback to the railroad and you have a 15-foot easement. Technically, we don't have that sort of right-of-way in these other neighborhoods that would allow you to even widen your streets to accommodate this need. That's why, in my opinion, it's fairly unique, and it could be an improvement to that road versus where Prospect and Madison, it's kind of how it is. There's not much you can do to change it. So just, that's kind of when I look at this, and we have an opportunity to not, you drive down Madison and Prospect at 7:30 in the morning where all the cars are on there and people are going to school, especially Madison. I drive that every day. You stop, you weave, you duck and weave, and you're looking for people coming out. I don't really care for it. I don't think it's an optimum situation. And now we want to do that to 7th Street, and I just can't wrap my mind around it. Why, if there may be some different options out there that we're willing to explore. We've kind of taken it down the path of the options we're not going to do. We were talking about just putting rock in there. That's not going to happen. We talked about just, some other options of letting people park within our 15-foot easement and taking them off the railroad's property. Well, obviously, that's an ordinance violation, so we're not doing that. So I think now we've got one more option maybe to look at. I think we should allow ourselves the time to look at that option.
I guess I view it as moving toward allowing parking on the one side of the street is an option. It is an option in itself, so.
I guess I would have to kind of concur with that too, because I think if we start jumping in here and saying, okay, we're going to expand this paving here, do we know that it is going to be the assumed, you know, I think that's what happens a lot of times. We see the worst case scenario as being the assumption or that as being fact in lieu of just an assumption. And I think if we proceed with this ordinance, there's nothing that prevents us from re-looking at it in a, you know, we run through this and see it as a trial period situation, and 6 months from now, if we have all kinds of traffic reports and accident reports and everything else along that line, then we take another look at it. You know, it's, I equate this much to the same thing that I heard a year ago in February when the post office moved and we were going to have umpteen numbers of accidents on that intersection. And I checked a year after that occurred down there, you know, the assumption was we need to put a light up there and we need to do all these other things. And Chief advised me that there was one accident in that 12-month time period down there, and that accident occurred because traffic coming from the south. So I think we're assuming that this is going to create a tremendous amount of problem, whereas we have the option of addressing it if it does create a lot of problem.
So are you suggesting if the ordinance were to pass, we should come back after a specified period of time and look at it again?
No, what I'm suggesting is that we pass the ordinance, and if it creates a problem, then we address it again. It's like everything else, you know, you know, it's the same, similar to this, where we put up stop signs and no parking and everything else as far as ordinances in areas that you deal with it as the problem arises. If there's a problem.
We absolutely have, I mean, you have the ability to do that at any time that the council feels it necessary to readdress it. You can readdress it anytime you'd like. I mean, you know, if there's problems, it maybe it'll rise in priority. You are trying to compare and contrast your whole 1 and 6 year street plan to this street or this parking issue. You know, and you guys know that list as well as I do, that there's other priorities as well. So when you balance those out, you have to ask yourself, does this one rise to a certain priority that you're going to put additional dollars towards or replacement dollars towards?
Is this also a main road that fire and rescue would take, say going to Omaha Avenue? And is there any report of them saying it would, I guess, clog up the street or you know, large vehicles like that going down there, there's other people coming, obviously they have to pull over as well as they can, but do we foresee any issues there?
Sure, they use 7th Street to go to certain sections of town. We've visited with the fire chief and the police chief about this on both occasions, and they didn't have any issues with the parking.
We may have discussed this the last time, but is there anything that says the speed limit will change there if the ordinance is passed?
I don't recall us talking directly about changing the speed limit with a signage, but I would submit to you, if you put parking on there, I think the speed will slow some, which I think would be beneficial to the neighborhood as well.
Not when they race down there side by side at night, and it happens a lot. You get another lane of cars parked over there, there's gonna be some accidents.
Are you aware, Shane, have we had any selective enforcement over there in the last 3-6 months?
Chief shaking his head, he's right outside. He's shaking his head, no, not in the last 6 months we haven't. That's something we could consider, and we have set up our JAMR in that area, if I remember right, Chief, to do some speed studies and traffic counts down in that area. We could do that again after the parking's on there, if the council, or whenever you like, I guess, as far as that.
So have there been complaints given to the police department recently about that particular issue?
I tell you, you can drive down there several different times. You guys just don't know till you live there. I mean, the radios are so loud when they go by, it just shakes the glass in your windows, and you don't need to wait till the accident happens, some kid step out of a car, if you're gonna park, get killed, and then do something about it. That's what.
I drive there every day, back on that road every day to take my daughter to school, and people are blowing those stop signs east and west onto 7th Street every day. And at night, there is no light on the east side of 7th all the way. There's no light on that side. That's not the reason they drag race down there. And the road is so rough, and the people that live all on the west side can't pull out and really can't see because it's all, the lights that are on the west side are partially blocked by the trees, and there's no lights on the east side at all.
And is it worth a life to put parking on the east side? Is it worth that?
Could I would like to ask you one question, then would you say no parking at all then?
Unless it's 100% approved by the people who live on there.
Sorry about that.
Our house will be for sale.
That still wasn't, I mean, would we want parking on the east side or no parking at all? So,
No. No parking at all, or no?
no parking, period.
Period?
So, again,
If you put the parking on the east side, what you've got is probability of a hazard there, where somebody opens their car door or a kid runs across the street and gets killed. It's not worth that.
I would,
Cross all that street all the time, going from the houses to the west, they cross the street to get to the schools, blocks down. They walk, I see at least anywhere from 5 to 10 kids by the time I go to and from dropping my daughter off, picking her up from school. Little kids are crossing there all the time in the middle of 7th Street, not at the corners. And with it still being partly not fully lit with the sun in the morning, you're not going to see those kids. And like the lady was saying here, there's going to be one of those kids hit and killed.
I think what you don't understand is they're asking you right now if to eliminate parking altogether, which means you'd have no parking in the terrace and no parking on the street.
On the east side.
Of course.
What?
That's what they would ask.
But that's what that's the road we're going down. And I know when we had our meeting with this,
What's the big idea of just taking the parking off?
excuse, I need you, if nothing else, I need you to use the microphone and sign in up here, so.
Why, because I object to it?
No, ma'am, it's not that you object to it, but it is being broadcast on the,
Hearing what I'm
I would suggest probably not, because earlier, the man next to you was not hearing what the city administrator was saying, and the microphones are picking it up, so.
hearing what I'm saying now.
I mentioned the public, though, and the public doesn't pick it up that are watching on TV unless you use the microphones.
You're on TV, well, great. Now your question again.
I need you to please sign in. Yes. because what I was understanding in your discussion out there was that you did not want to put the parking on the east side.
I do not want to put the parking on the east side, nor
So my
do I want it
question-
taken off the probability of us parking over there, because what are we supposed to do when we have company?
Parking over where?
Across the street on the terrace.
Because it's not legal to be parking on the terrace. Citywide,
Citywide.
That's ordinance citywide, correct?
Yes.
And so now you decided to enforce this because somebody didn't like the looks of it?
No, I think it's a matter of that it wasn't enforced for how many years, and it should have been. And so the question,
But it was all right
before the body,
To have
Could I-
gardens over there?
I am not sure that that's correct either. Because the gardens were occurring on the railroad's property.
The gardens were on city property or the railroad property, yes.
And no, I guess to be factual about it, no, it wasn't okay to have, unless you would think it's okay for somebody else to have a garden on your front lawn.
Well, we're gonna have to drive on ours, so it don't matter.
So,
Yeah.
Ma'am, I would still need you to come to use the microphone, so.
She said we're going to have to drive on ours, park on ours, our side, in the lawn. And who's going to go by and see it and say, that just doesn't look very good?
Well, first of all, I believe if you park on the lawn, it needs to be paved, or no? Okay.
That ordinance is not passed.
That ordinance has not passed, but what the situation is are we going, the discussion and what's occurring here, should we have parking on the east side to see if there's a problem or not? Or should we not have parking on either side and not parking in the terrace? And so then it comes down to, so I'm hearing that you want parking those so that you have a place for, when people come to visit, that you have a place for people to
Absolutely,
park.
yes.
Park legally.
You could legalize it.
That's the complicated thing here, and it goes to the bigger issue of enforcement. I think whatever happened back in the day, it sounds like it was a long time ago that it was allowed for whatever reason to park on the terrace when it shouldn't have. That's why we're having this discussion. Otherwise, there would be no discussion. There just shouldn't be parking in that area.
Then there shouldn't be parking on the east side either, because the fire trucks and the ambulance and the police go by there practically every day, every night. And some of those people work nights and get off work in the middle of the night. So are they supposed to park on the other side of the street and walk across? I mean, maybe the traffic isn't that heavy at that time of night, but still. It's the same idea. And some kid getting out of the car and little kid running across the street. I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's right.
So if the parking, if the ordinance enforced, no parking on the terrace, you would prefer there to be no parking allowed on the east side of the street either. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay?
I'll share with the council that we did have a neighborhood meeting a long time ago already on this subcommittee with the neighborhood meeting, and all these, I believe these neighbors were, I'm not sure if you were, ma'am.
No, I wasn't. I was coming home from the hospital in Omaha.
Okay.
After surgery.
Okay,
So
yeah,
I
I
didn't
guess.
make that meeting.
Yeah, okay. But there were other neighbors there that did make the meeting that were in favor of this. So it was a mixed bag of opposed and favor having parking on the street. And based on tonight, I mean, we're just getting the opposition flavor of that, but I will remind you that there was folks that live there on that street that
I
wanted the
haven't talked
parking.
to anybody that's favored it.
Well, they did at that meeting, so.
Nobody wanted to take away parking, because they need the parking, because they have single start garages and single driveways, and they need a place to put cars. So what I gathered from that meeting was, we don't want to lose the terrace, and we don't want to park on 7th Street. So that what we took from that was, let's try to brainstorm and come up with some ideas on how we can address this issue that works great for our community. You know, not only the people who live on that street, but the community itself.
Thank you.
And I think we have something out there that we could discuss. And I think we should allow ourselves the time to make that, just have those discussions, and maybe it's gonna take talking with the neighbors again and looking at some of these numbers that we're talking about. Because
And-
if you break it down, what Clint just shared with me, your cost is less than $40 a month if it's paved per household. So there's some opportunity there that maybe people would be in favor of to widen the road, have the parking, and when you're driving down, and the rest of the citizens who use 7th Street don't have to worry about digging somebody's car, because every time you drive on one of those roads, people do not feel comfortable in 10 foot, I'm sorry. They'll hog the line, and then you have to get over, and I don't want to see us do that to another road in our community, when we have some options here. So, I don't know where we go from here. I'm assuming if we vote on it, it goes off the table altogether.
It's,
You know,
currently it is not
yeah.
tabled. It is for action. Correct me if I'm wrong, there is the option to retable it and/or vote on it. So those are the two options. And if you vote on it, it could be a yay or a nay. If it came up as a nay, and again, correct me if I'm wrong on that, if it came up as a nay, there would be no parking on either side. Correct? On the street?
There,
Well,
that's what it's
we
not.
have to-
I'm
enforce-
asking the question, so please allow me.
We have to enforce the ordinance one way or another, so theoretically.
There's an ordinance out there, if I can address a couple of things in the comment I made to Shane that he just mentioned. The ordinance that's out there, as far as I know, has been out there since at least 1962. And the 1962 code 24-16, what is now 24-161, prohibits a couple of things. It prohibits parking on the terrace, whether it's on South 7th Street or any place. And that ordinance has been in place. Obviously, it hasn't been enforced in that particular area all the time. That ordinance has been in place since at least 1962. There's also that same provision in that same section says that if you're going to park on a terrace, the terrace has to be paved. So that's what the ordinance says. When we talk about the paving things, which I was not aware of until we started talking about here, first of all, I think I got this clear now. A gap paving doesn't allow for any remonstrance. A gap paving can only be accomplished if the road isn't already in place to the standards of the city, which I think 7th Street would not meet that requirement, so gap paving is not an option. When you talk about paving districts, the statute allows, Randy, you said 15 years, I think the statute allows for 20 years for bonds for paving. And if there's a paving district, then the remonstrance provision allows that if there are more than 50% of front footage that prohibits it, then you can't do it. The most recent time that there was a remonstrance against a paving section or a paving district here was a few years ago. You will remember going to Alter from 1st Street. You passed the paving district and it was remonstrated against. The other thing that I think is relevant here, and I haven't had a chance to think about this, but when you talk about the 22 houses or whatever somebody said, that's only on one side of the street. There's property on the other side of the street, and I don't know of anything, is there anything that prohibits assessing a railroad?
Hasn't been very successful.
I don't think you're going to be very successful. They remonstrated against the action down there, but when you talk about when you talk about that, what that means is if the railroad would remonstrate against it, you get the railroad, which would be half, one of those 22 houses puts you over the 50% and you can't assess it. So with that said, I'll be quiet.
I would like to make a motion to table this until we can have further discussion about possibilities with meeting with the residents again and bringing up some of these options.
I'll second that.
In favor of tabling?
Discussion on that?
Have discussion?
Just so I get this straight, the longer we delay a decision on here, we're just continuing allowance of illegal parking. I mean, that's...
Well, to be honest with you, we have, and I appreciate that, Councilman, because we're kind of in a lurch now as your staff to know what to do, because we have an expectation from the railroad that the parking is not on their property for sure, and then we have an active violation of a city ordinance going on every day until we decide on what to do about this. I would very respectfully just have you consider that, not to borrow trouble. I mean, we don't even know if there's going to be a major issue, and you can open the situation back up and discuss all the options in front of you anytime there's a major problem, if there's a problem. Prospect Avenue doesn't have a problem. There's 2 apartment complexes on Prospect Avenue between 7th and 13th Street, one on the north side and one on the south side. There's houses, obviously, on both sides of Prospect Avenue. It's the same width. It's almost identical in traffic count. 2,200 cars might seem like a big number, but it's not a big number in the world of traffic counts for our city. So, you know, in the future as it grows, if 7th Street continues to grow and you have traffic that increases down there, then you can always widen the street. It's going to have to be widened at some point in our future. I don't know when that'll be. And then you'll have additional right-of-way that you could widen the street on to the east, perhaps as well. It's another consideration for the council.
So to me, the question becomes, are we going to enforce the statute on the books or not? I mean, to me, that's a question before us. And this was tabled at a meeting in, what, early February?
Or January, I believe.
And
January 19th.
I think it was tabled at that time for the purpose of discussing options. And that's why we're here today. Some of those options were discussed and reviewed, and now we're tasked with making a decision. So from my point of view, we need to make that decision, whether we're going to enforce the statute on our books or not.
Well, I guess that was what I was hearing also in the January meeting, was that, you know, we begged the railroad not to be pressing to, you know, it's private property, and they were saying, you know, get those vehicles and that usage off of our private property. And I believe that, I mean, I as a citizen would be very upset if my neighbor decided that my front yard that's on my property was a perfect place for them to garden or to park their boat or trailer or whatever that way. So I think that's one thing that, regardless of, you know, whether it's tabled or not, that needs to cease and desist there. And the other thing then is whether we are going to enforce the ordinance that's citywide. We're past that.
I think parking has been allowed there for years. And all of a sudden, we're just going to say stop, and we're not going to give ourselves the option to see what we can do. I mean, the only option we discussed in that subcommittee meeting was about not being an alley there. That was what we were looking at. Was there an alley there? Was there a possibility that we could put an alley through there and people could now be parking in their alleys like the other neighborhoods down the street are? Well, we found out there wasn't one. And so it came out of there, and we had some discussion in that meeting, and I think now we're having more discussion, but I think it's a unique situation. There's some stuff we can do, but I think if the railroad can't be open to a month, 2 months, or whatever it's going to take to get this decided, I can't understand that when you've allowed it to go for so many years. I think for a long time, people mowed it themselves.
we did.
You know, so I mean, let's just,
Voted for the last 20 years.
so I think I mean, we've got an ordinance out there. Yes, we could choose to enforce it, but let's give it the time we need to make sure that we've covered all our bases. And once somebody says to me, Shane, this ain't gonna work, you know, then obviously we've got laws and regulations or ordinance we have to enforce. But I think right now I think we can work this out.
What kind of message does that send, though, to someone who says, well, I've got an extra vehicle, I have no space to park it anywhere close to my house, but I have my lawn, I have my terrace, I want to park it there. And I should be able to, because these people are parking on city terrace. I mean, to me, it goes to consistent enforcement throughout the community.
No, you make a good point, and I understand where you're coming from. It's just that we've allowed this in this, we don't allow that in other areas. We don't. When I was on camp, well, Jim brought up the paving, you have to park on pavement, an ordinance, then Clint talked about, we haven't passed that. You know, so I know we've discussed this before about people parking their lawns, but this is a situation where we chose not to enforce it for 50 years, and now we're choosing to enforce it, and I think we should allow the time to figure out if there's anything we can do before we have to enforce that in that neighborhood.
And it would seem to me that we have possibly an option here that we haven't thoroughly discovered. And if we were able to table this and give it the discussion that it deserves, in my mind, with citizen input, that may be the proper thing to do.
And that option is, you suggested that there was an option.
As Shane had mentioned earlier.
The creating of
bonding.
bonding and paving and that, so.
Possibility. And if we're going to discuss options, when, you know, obviously we don't want to be discussing options 2 or 3 years from now, but if there is one that's viable that we haven't had an opportunity to talk over, perhaps it would be a good idea if we did.
Has that discussion with the railroad taken place about paving that terrace? I mean, is there objective?
No, I have not. I did reach back out to the railroad and said, you know, we're still working on that and be patient, and that's all I said. I did not address a paving assessment on there. I would be curious if the property owners that are here tonight would be interested in an assessment on their property to pave that parking on the other side.
You know, when you're living on Social Security, it's pretty limited.
Understood. I understand that. And I think you're going to get a sense of that quickly. If I had to guess, a lot of these properties are rentals, I believe. Is that correct? Maybe 50%, I'm guessing, if you can help me. Not quite 50%. Some of those properties are rentals, so the property owners.
You're asking 3 people to speak for 22, you know.
I'm not. I'm just asking.
I know, but I think we need the opportunity to present to the people that live in that neighborhood, have the meeting like we had.
We can sure have another meeting if that's what the council direct us what you want to do. I would suggest, though, if you want to have another meeting, that we enforce the parking ordinance on at least the railroad property, because I'm losing credibility with the railroad.
Mm-hmm. Well, could we vote tonight on parking on the east side of 7th Street, get it striped, get it parked, get the cars off the terrace, and then we can discover other options down the road for a paving? This way we vote on this, we get the cars off the terrace, and then we can explore other possibilities.
We have to vote down.
We could, but what's outstanding right now is that there's a table motion out here. And so we would need to decide first if we want to table action on it, and then if we didn't want to table action on it, then it would come back to the motion that was standing on the floor prior to the requested tabling.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So does everybody understand that on the council up here? That what we're looking at right now, and I would like to, I guess, call for the vote. The vote at this point in time is whether we want to table action on this proposal or not. Would you please vote?
Voting in favor of tabling the ordinance is Councilmember Granquist, Merrill, Clausen. Voting against tabling, Councilmember Lange, Moaning, Faust, and File. Motion fails.
Okay, so the tabling action failed. Now we are back to the point where we have consideration of approval of ordinance 5376. And we've had plenty of discussion on this. Is there any more discussion? If not, then I would ask for your vote. Well, I thought we had a motion. Okay. We do
lost the
need,
motion.
I would need a motion, yes.
I would move to consider approval of ordinance number 5376.
Second?
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we approve ordinance 5376. Again, I ask if there,
Short title.
you got a short title? Short
Ready?
title.
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska to amend Section 24-164 of the Official City Code to allow parking on the east side of South 7th Street between Michigan Avenue and Paswack Avenue, to provide when this ordinance shall be in full force and effect, and to provide for publication of this ordinance in pamphlet form.
Okay, and we've had a lot of discussion in front of it. Again, discussion before we vote.
I'd just like to say one thing. The only way I would support this is on a trial basis. Basically, we're gonna pass a law here and then do what Shane said. Maybe still go ahead with this meeting, see how it turned out the first couple weeks, but go ahead with this neighborhood meeting, see what the options are out there, see what they are thinking about the paving, see what they're thinking about the new parking, and keep looking at this as we're doing this. If we're just gonna pass it and stop and let it go, then I'm not in support of it. But if we keep progressing, trying to look at some of the angles after we do this, then I would support it. I think we need to address them just to keep ahead of the ball there, so.
Okay, so noted, and I guess, you know, that's really kind of what we're doing, I believe, in every instance, whenever we pass an ordinance.
they're on the same
So
page as we are.
But that way, at least it's direction to staff that way, so.
So what would be the trigger that would bring it back to us for discussion? A complaint from a single citizen?
First-
20 complaints? You know, I
We
don't
can
know.
have a neighborhood meeting, a second neighborhood meeting, Councilman, if that's what I think I hear you saying, and seeing if, first of all, we have to understand as a staff, at least I do, it would be unique to pave the terrace and have the assessments go to the property owners, I think. I don't know if, to my knowledge, we haven't done a great deal of that, so I want to make sure that I understand that clearly as a city administrator. So staff will discuss that. Then we can call a secondary neighborhood meeting to see what the appetite is for the neighborhood down there. And I can talk to the railroad about whether they would care about the paving of the terrace as well, knowing that they may have an assessment coming. You know, I can have that discussion with them independently and/or at the meeting if that's what the council would like us to do. It'd be nice to know what the neighborhood thinks about an assessment. I usually know what they think about assessments, but not always.
Okay, and you got to realize too, this is an ordinance, and so we've got 3 readings on it.
First reading, yeah.
So this is just first reading, and if nobody makes a motion to suspend the rules, and then you have to get a vote to make that pass anyway, so, I mean, there's that option out there for a good 4 weeks, 4 to 5
Shane,
weeks.
that's what I'm saying. Pass it now, get the ball rolling, do some investigation before the second reading, where they can still have comment, and see where we're at before we finalize it, you know.
Well, I guess that's the important thing, you know, for you people to realize. Just because it passes here this evening would not mean that it's going to necessarily pass on second reading and/or on third reading. So it can be defeated at any point in time there that way.
I think it needs to be made clear that I'm talking about a paving district. I'm not sure where the assessments are going. I'm just bringing out there that there's options for assessments. It's a paving district, so obviously we can look at this and there can be discussion on that, how that'll all break down and how it'll shake down. But at this point in time, I'm not directing everything at them. I'm just trying to throw ideas out there that us as a council can look at and review.
And it's also important for them to realize that they would have one more opportunity to publicly discuss.
Speak to it, yes.
Yes.
Because that would be at the second
opposed
reading
to.
as opposed to the third reading when there is no discussion. So is there any further discussion regarding this? And I would at this time. Whoop.
One thing to say before you vote.
Okay. Please.
I think it's appropriate to say before you vote, noting how the motion to table went, is that you need a majority vote of the members of the council in order to pass this on first reading. You need 5 affirmative votes. So even though there's 7 of you here, if the vote is 4-3, the motion fails. You need 5 affirmative votes to pass on first reading.
With that being said, though, I still ask for your vote at this time.
Voting in favor of ordinance 5376, council members Lengy, Moaning, Faust-File. Voting against the ordinance on first reading, Granquist, Merrill, and Clausen. Motion fails.
So then, Clint, the motion has failed. Where do we proceed from here then?
The ordinance, whatever that ordinance number was, is gone.
53-7.
It doesn't preclude that ordinance having whatever discussions y'all want to do, and there's nothing that would preclude that ordinance coming back when there was a full complement of elected officials to embrace that. So you got an open palette just like you had before you considered this one.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, that brings us into item 31, and that once a month we have the public comment period. I would note during this time that there can be no action taken on comments that are made during the public comment period here. And with that being said, I would ask if there is anyone in the audience who wishes to address council. Seeing none, I would then ask for a motion of adjournment with the note that tonight is the time also where we have coffee with the council, or a portion of the council that way, so.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, it's been moved that we adjourn. We are adjourned.